I want you to picture this. It's early morning, January 11th, 2013. A janitor walks into the gym at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. The place is quiet. The overhead lights are buzzing. Rows of upright wrestling mats lean against the wall like silent giants. But then, something stops him. One of the mats isn't like the others. It's been tipped slightly forward, and poking out from inside, just barely visible, is a single white sneaker. Curious, he looks inside. What he finds is the body of a 17-year-old boy, face down, wedged deep inside the rolled mat. It's Kendrick Johnson. Police arrive. Within hours, they rule it a freak accident. The theory? Kendrick dropped a shoe into the center of the mat, tried to reach in head first, got stuck, and suffocated. Most people believed it. School resumes. The story fades. But what if I told you that story falls apart the moment you scratch the surface? Because I did scratch the surface, and what I found doesn't just raise questions. It screams cover-up. We're talking missing organs, security cameras that malfunctioned at just the right moment, and a second autopsy that contradicts the first in a way that's hard to ignore. Over the next few minutes, I'll take you inside this case, from the coroner's cold table to the courtroom, and into the heart of a grieving family's fight for the truth. Because I've seen the reports, I've reviewed the interviews, and the more I dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just an accident. This was something else. To understand how things unfolded, let's go to the morning of January 11th, 2013. The fluorescent lights buzzed to life just before 7:15 a.m. on January 11th, 2013, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood of Lowndes High's wrestling room. In the stillness, the only sound was the faint scrape of sneakers against the floor, an echo of yesterday's practice that refused to die. This was a place of triumph for many medals gleaming on dusty shelves, banners proclaiming past victories, and the mat itself, the very stage where 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson honed his craft. Kendrick wasn't just any student. He was an honor roll scholar who carried a gentle confidence, the kind that made teachers trust him with new responsibilities and teammates lean on him for guidance. Every morning for weeks, he'd slip through these double doors well before sunrise, determined to sharpen his moves before the bell rang. His sister remembered how he'd call her the night before, his voice bright. "Big day tomorrow. Watch me take state." But that morning, something felt off. The usual clatter of coaches' whistles didn't follow him in. No rhythmic thumping of bodies hitting mats. Instead, an unsettling silence cloaked the room. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Even more curious, the stacked wrestling mats sat untouched in the corner, until a single sneaker, abandoned and alone, caught the first glint of light seeping through the hallway window. How did one shoe end up there, and where was its owner? Most mornings here started the same way: warm-ups, drills, camaraderie. Yet on this chilly January dawn, the routine had been shattered. And although no one knew it yet, that silent sneaker was about to expose fractures beneath the surface of this tight-knit community. Fractures that would lead to questions everyone would come to regret asking. But something still didn't add up, and that's where our story truly begins. As the clock edged closer to 7:20 a.m., the wrestling room still lay in an eerie calm, until Mr. Wallace, the school's morning custodian, pushed open those double doors. His flashlight beam swept over stacked mats like stone slabs in a crypt. That's when he froze. A single sneaker, its laces trailing, peeking from beneath the topmost roll. Ever seen a puzzle piece that doesn't fit? That shoe didn't belong there. No wrestler ever left a stray shoe in the mat room, least of all before practice. Wallace crouched, the beam trembling in his hand. He nudged the mat with his toe. It didn't unroll smoothly. There was weight under there, something rigid, something wrong. With each tug, his breath hitched. The mat unfolded like an ancient scroll until the beam finally hit it. Kendrick Johnson's motionless form, face down, arms pinned awkwardly by the rubber padding. The morning sun had just begun to creep in, illuminating the lifeless silhouette of the boy who showed up here each dawn. Heart pounding, Wallace radioed the front office, and the world shifted on its axis. In that moment, a routine school day became a nightmare. Most people would think, he must have slipped getting his shoe. But after what you've seen so far, you know not to accept the easy answer. Why did the cameras in the hallway record nothing of this? Why was Kendrick the only one missing, while every other wrestler showed up for early drills? In the next few seconds, or hours, minutes, even days, we'd see a story unravel that no one saw coming. Because when the very mat that's meant to keep athletes safe becomes the vessel of their end, the questions it raises can never be silenced. And here's the first. How did Kendrick Johnson, honor student, brother, friend, end up trapped inside his own school's mat, with no one to witness his final moments? Before we peel back what really happened that morning, take a second to like this video and subscribe. These stories aren't just headlines, they're lives interrupted, families still waiting for answers. By staying curious, you help make sure stories like Kendrick's aren't buried in silence. When Lowndes County Sheriff's deputies arrived, they moved with practiced efficiency, photographing the scene, snapping chalk outlines, and listening as the school principal explained he must have tripped, reached for his shoe, and somehow got stuck. By lunchtime, the local news had already run the headline, "Tragic Accident in Wrestling Room." But as soon as you peel back that tidy label, the story splinters. First, the cameras. 2 hallway security feeds, one pointed at the mat room door, another at the locker room down the hall. Both went dark that morning. Technical glitches, the district IT director claimed. Yet maintenance logs showed no prior issues. No cheery morning practice footage, no sign of Kendrick entering or exiting, just blank tape where evidence should have been. Then there was the autopsy report. The state pathologist ruled cause of death as positional asphyxia, a polite way of saying he suffocated. But reading deeper, you find notes about blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Injuries far too severe for a simple head-first tangle. It wasn't until his family's lawyer pushed for clarity that those details surfaced in court filings. And worse, Kendrick's heart and brain were shipped off to the state lab for further study and never returned. His mother was handed an empty container. "It feels like someone took his heart and left me nothing." Those missing organs became a symbol of every unanswered question. By the end of that first day, whispers circled the school. They're hiding something. And though the sheriff upheld the slip and fall conclusion, the community sensed a deeper fracture. How could a boy slip, fall, and die without any witnesses or footage? Why were critical organs conveniently lost? Every official thread frayed at the edges, begging the question, if this wasn't a tragic accident, what was it? And so we keep digging, because when the narrative itself cracks, you know the truth isn't far behind. Just when it seemed the slip and fall story had run its course, the Johnson family dropped their bombshell. They'd hired Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned private pathologist who had seen enough puzzling cases to know when something stinks. When he laid out his findings, the room went deathly silent. Dr. Baden's report flipped everything on its head. The fractures in Kendrick's skull weren't consistent with a gentle fall. They were the kind of fractures you'd see when blunt force meets bone on a hard surface. In other words, this wasn't simply positional asphyxia, it was a violent impact, too severe for a boy merely reaching for a stray shoe. But there was more. Baden noted bruising patterns on Kendrick's upper arms and shoulders, marks that suggested someone grappled with him from behind. And the angle of the head trauma? It aligned perfectly with the rigid edge of the rolled mat, as if Kendrick had been forced in, not slipped. Pause there for a moment. Imagine the power shift. You're told it's a tragic accident, then a world-class expert says it's nothing of the sort. Churches fell quiet. Conversations in Valdosta coffee shops took on a hushed tone. The local sheriff's office was forced off autopilot. Investigators had to at least reassess the accident label. Yet the official ruling didn't change. The state pathologist stood by the asphyxia conclusion, and the district doubled down. But the public had now heard Barden's testimony, and once that seed of doubt is planted, you can't unsee what it reveals. So the question transforms. If Kendrick Johnson didn't simply fall, who put him there? And if someone's fingerprints aren't on the mat, how deep does this conspiracy go? The fallacy had been unmasked, but the deeper truth remained buried, and now the hunt was on. News of Dr. Baden's explosive findings spread through Valdosta like wildfire. By the next morning, the Johnson family stood in front of flashing cameras, grief etched into every line of their faces. Kendrick's mother, voice trembling but fierce, declared, "This was no accident. My son didn't climb into that mat on his own." Her words cut through the static of misinformation, planting a seed of doubt that grew with each retelling. Across town, the school superintendent and the sheriff held a joint press conference. They repeated the same phrase in lockstep: "All evidence points to a tragic accident. There is no credible proof of foul play." Microphones hovered inches from their lips as they assured parents the campus was safe, cameras back online, and procedures thoroughly reviewed. They even showcased newly serviced security feeds, generic footage of empty hallways, yet studiously avoided footage from the key time window. Within the community, lines began to harden. Some neighbors rallied behind the family, posting flyers outside the district courthouse, "Justice for Kendrick." Others called local talk shows to praise the school's transparency, convinced someone was simply exploiting a tragedy. On social media, two camps emerged. One side sharing heart-wrenching photos of Kendrick's smile, demanding answers. The other reposting the sheriff's statement, lamenting hurting his reputation. Throughout it all, you could feel the tension coil tighter. Every time a reporter asked for footage or records, they were met with pending review or confidential personnel files. Friends of Kendrick whispered about overheard hallway conversations. Some teachers allegedly told students not to speak to the press, and every technical glitch in the cameras now felt less like an accident and more like a calculated delay. By the end of that week, the question on everyone's lips wasn't, "How did it happen?" but "Who's covering for whom?" And when a community divides so sharply between those crying out for truth and those clinging to denial, you know the real battle has only just begun. Just when the community thought the worst was behind them, a whisper began circulating through the hallways of Lowndes High, one that would twist the knife deeper into an already gaping wound. It started with a rumor. A teammate named Jamarcus had been openly resentful of Kendrick's success. He'd lost to Kendrick in every match that season, and some said he'd been seen arguing with him just days before the tragedy. But whispers aren't proof, so most dismissed it as idle gossip. Then late one evening, a former custodian contacted the Johnson family's attorney. He claimed maintenance logs from that fateful morning had been cleaned up. Pages were missing, timestamps amended. It was as if someone had gone back with an eraser and scrubbed out the parts they didn't want anyone to see. Picture this: you're handed a daily log that once recorded a perfect track record. Lights checked, cameras tested, mats inspected, but the moment Kendrick's body appears in shot, the logs go blank. No tests recorded, no notes from the overnight crew. Just a neat gap in the timeline where the truth should live. Around the same time, a junior wrestler who'd initially told police he'd seen nothing now changed his story. Under pressure, some say even threats, he admitted he heard a loud thud and a muffled grunt just before the mat was rolled back. His eyes darted as he spoke, glancing over his shoulder at anyone who might overhear. And if that weren't enough, an anonymous tip led investigators to discover a discarded pair of gloves, stained, crumpled, hidden behind some old gym equipment. They matched none of Kendrick's gear. No fingerprints, no owner listed. Yet the gloves bore traces of something dark and sticky, something that no accident should leave behind. Now we have a trio of contradictions: a rival with motive, wiped clean maintenance logs, and a witness whose story kept shifting. Each piece alone could be written off as coincidence. Together, they form a tripwire under the accident narrative, waiting to snap. So we're left with the chilling question. If someone deliberately erased the record of that morning, what else are they hiding? And who would go to such lengths to ensure the mat remained silent? Because in Kendrick Johnson's case, the deeper you probe, the darker the shadows become, and nothing about this accident feels accidental anymore. The courthouse corridor smelled of stale coffee and polished linoleum as the Johnson family approached the heavy oak doors. Cameras clicked in the distance, but here, only the hollow echo of their footsteps. Kendrick's mother led the way, clutching a manila folder crammed with Dr. Baden's report, her knuckles white. His father followed, shoulders rigid with grief and anger. Inside, the lead state investigator sat behind a long table, files neatly stacked, expression unreadable. As the Johnsons crossed the threshold, time seemed to slow. For a fleeting second, it was just them, two sides bound together by one impossible question. What truly happened to their son? Why won't you listen? Kendrick's mother's voice trembled but carried through the room. Every eye turned. He was my boy. You told me he slipped. You told me cameras failed. You told me it was over. But Dr. Baden says otherwise. Why are you hiding behind accident when the evidence screams foul play? The investigator leaned back, folding his hands. Ma'am, our conclusion remains. There's no new admissible evidence to warrant criminal charges. His words land like slabs of concrete. No empathy, no pause, just the finality of officialdom. Kendrick's sister, barely 12, stepped forward. Her lip quivered as she raised a trembling photograph. Kendrick's grin frozen in happier days. He called me at night to promise he'd be home, she whispered. I waited and waited, but he never came. The folder slipped from her grasp, papers scattering like fallen leaves, each sheet a reminder of unanswered cries. Silence enveloped the room. Then, with measured calm, Kendrick's father said, "You've failed him. You failed all of us." His voice cracked, but the weight behind it was undeniable. Reporters surged in, shouting questions. The investigator rose, swept up his files, and retreated without a backward glance. The Johnsons were left amid the scattered documents, symbols of a battle that had only just begun. As they filed out, Kendrick's sister looked back at that empty bench. In her eyes sat a question no official report could ever satisfy. If they won't admit the truth, who will? In that seismic moment, the facade of closure shattered. The moral heart of this story, of parents demanding justice in a world determined to stay silent, had been laid bare, and it was impossible to turn away. Months turned into years, but the echoes of that January morning never faded. The Johnson family pushed forward, filing a federal civil lawsuit against the school district, the sheriff's office, and even unnamed staff members, anyone they believed had a hand in covering up the truth. Courtroom battles played out in the local press, each hearing peeling back another layer of disbelief, each witness testimony swinging between heartbreak and anger. Then came the settlement. In a quiet mediation room surrounded by attorneys in conservative suits, the school district agreed to pay an undisclosed sum to Kendrick's family. No admission of guilt, no public apology, just a sealed agreement and a handful of checks. It was labeled compensation for emotional distress and related damages, but to the Johnsons, it felt like a bribe to keep their mouths shut. Criminal charges never filed. The district attorney publicly confirmed that without irrefutable evidence of intent, pressing charges would be impossible. The accident ruling stood firmly on the books. Kendrick Johnson's death certificate remained unchanged, positional asphyxia. His official story was, at least in the eyes of the law, over. But for the Johnson family, the fight wasn't finished. They continued to lobby the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, gathered signatures for new inquiries, and maintained an online memorial where supporters could post theories and share updates. Every anniversary, they organized candlelight vigils at the edge of the football field, each flame a plea for the truth to see the light. Yet, with the public record locked tight, many moved on. Other headlines emerged. School renovations, championship banners, the weekday rhythm reasserted itself. The mat room reopened. New mats replaced the old. A plaque near the entrance commemorated past state champions, but made no mention of Kendrick. Here's the haunting reality. Justice had been deferred, not denied. The Johnsons had received financial redress, but not answers. The system that promised to protect their child had delivered a verdict many believe was orchestrated to protect itself. And so, the official case file, hundreds of pages, thousands of dollars spent, countless hours of grief, remains frozen on accidental death. For Kendrick's family, though, there is no closure, only the relentless pursuit of a truth that refuses to stay silent. This wasn't just a story about a teenager who died under strange circumstances. This was a story about what happens when the system that's supposed to protect you turns silent. When a school, a town, and an entire investigation seem more interested in protecting themselves than answering a mother's scream of, "What happened to my son?" Kendrick Johnson didn't vanish in a remote forest or down an abandoned mine shaft. He vanished in plain sight, inside the very school where he was supposed to feel safe. And yet, despite surveillance cameras, classmates, teachers, janitors, and dozens of potential witnesses, no one saw a thing. Or maybe they did, and just never said. We followed the trail, the sneaker sticking out of a mat, the missing organs, the erased surveillance footage, the conflicting autopsies, and the mysterious witnesses whose stories kept changing. We watched a family trade comfort for confrontation, peace for protest, and what they got in return? A sealed settlement, a reclassified death, and a son buried twice, first by soil and then by silence. Here's the final sting. When the public attention faded, when the petitions stopped trending, when the vigils grew smaller, the truth was still right there, rolled up in a gym mat. And we still don't know how Kendrick got there. Because when a 17-year-old honors student, athlete, and son dies inside his school, and nobody can or will explain why, it forces us to ask a question we're scared to face. How many more accidents are hiding in plain sight? In schools, in towns, in systems built on silence? How many more names are waiting to be whispered? How many more mats are waiting to be unrolled? And if Kendrick's truth was trapped once, who's going to speak for the next one? Kendrick Johnson walked into his high school that morning full of plans. Just another day in the life of a 17-year-old with dreams. But what happened next didn't just end his story. It exposed something far more disturbing, that sometimes the very places meant to protect our children can bury the truth instead. We opened with a mat, silent, innocuous, just part of the background, but hidden inside was a body, and surrounding that body, a trail of vanished footage, missing organs, and contradictions stacked like dominoes. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a test. A test of how far a family would go when everyone around them chose silence. A test of whether the truth can survive in a place that's decided it no longer matters. And here's the question that haunts this story. If Kendrick Johnson could vanish inside a high school gym in front of hundreds of people, how many other truths are we walking past every day? Maybe the scariest part of this case isn't what we found, but what we didn't. So if this story stays with you, if Kendrick's name lingers in your thoughts tomorrow or the day after, let that be its legacy. Not silence, but awareness. Because some stories don't end with answers. Some end with a question. Will we ever really know what happened inside that gym mat? Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe, share, and remember Kendrick. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never stop seeking the truth. I'm Derek, and I'll be back soon with another investigation.